Hello everyone, my name's Josie. Welcome to my channel and episode 4 of Everything Sewing. Today we're talking about patterns. This is a physical pattern. This was a digital pattern, now it's physical. We're talking about patterns today. We're going to start with the pattern envelope, which is only found on physical patterns, and then we'll go into like all of the nitty-gritty stuff, which will be both physical and digital. Obviously, the main difference is like digital patterns are supposed to be digital. However, unless you use a projector, all digital patterns typically have to be printed off and like taped together to get the pattern. So that's why this is it. So we're gonna go over the envelope first, then we'll go into the insides of the pattern, which will include the digital. Let's get started. Starting with the front of the pattern envelope, you'll see the pattern brand along with photos and drawings of the garments that the pattern envelope will contain. You can also see the pattern number, which I will let y'all know right now, the number does get reused after some time, typically when the pattern gets retired. And then lastly, on the front of the envelope, you can see the size options for the pattern envelope specifically. Now, to determine what size you'll need, you will need to figure out your measurements, which is your bust, your waist, and your hip measurements, and compare those measurements to the body measurement chart either found on the back of the envelope or on the envelope flap. When looking at this chart as well, you should be able to see the name that the sizing has been categorized into. This is quite universal for all big brand companies that make patterns, and there's only a few differences found across each brand. Now, in this specific pattern, you do see that there are two different name categories. There is a Mrs. and there is a Women's. The Mrs. category is made for people with a B cup or with a 2-inch difference between the bust and the high bust measurements. The Women's is made for C cups with a 1-inch difference between the bust and high bust measurements. Now, for both the Mrs. and the Women's, they're made for people who have a height average of 5 foot 5 inches to 5 foot 6 inches. For both the Mrs. and the Women's, there are also petite options. And the only difference is the petite options are made for people who are 5 foot 2 inches to 5 foot 3 inches. Another notable difference you may see between the petite sizes and what is considered regular sizing is where the hip measurement is taken. For petite sizes, the hip measurement is taken 7 inches below the waist. And for the regular sizes, the hip measurement is taken 9 inches below the waist. Now, if you have a larger or a smaller bust, you may end up having to do a full bust adjustment for a better fit. And as always, you will want to go with the largest measurement for sizing and then alter the pattern in necessary areas. Along with that, you may also measure between two different envelope sizes. In that scenario, you could buy both of the patterns, which price-wise is not the most ideal. Or you can buy only one of the patterns and choose to size up or down as needed, so you can alter the pattern to where it'll fit you better. Now, other size charts that you may find include the men's size chart, which is based on a male that is 5 foot 10 inches. Then there is the unisex size chart, which is just based on men's measurements. And then there are the kids size charts. And there are 4 different categories for kids. First is the infants, which is for babies. The toddlers is just larger than the infant one, and it does have a diaper allowance in the bottom area as well. Then there are the children sizes, which are for little ones who are now walking and are not wearing diapers. And then lastly, there is the girl/boy size, which are for kids that are growing but haven't quite started puberty or have matured in their body just yet. Hello, editing Josie here. We just finished talking about the different sizes and all the size charts. And I wanted to take a brief moment to kind of get a little serious and talk about taking your body measurements. So taking your body measurements is something that is necessary when it comes to buying clothing patterns. It's just kind of a fact of the matter. Unfortunately, you're going to need your body measurements to get the correct pattern. If you are someone that deals with body image issues of any sort, which is perfectly fine, life happens to a lot of people, so it's okay if you do. If you have those types of issues, or you just don't like your body that day or whatever, you don't have to take those measurements. You can take those measurements on any day, preferably a day that you feel good. Because your mental health and your happiness is above a little size chart measurement of a sewing pattern. Okay? You yourself matter way more than sewing clothes and all of that. So if you are wanting to take your measurements and let's say you get the first number and you don't like what that number says, stop. Otherwise you're gonna make yourself like not be in a good mood. You could ruin your day, your week. Like there's no reason to put yourself in a situation where you could end up feeling worse about yourself over some stupid measurements of a pattern. And if we're gonna be real, these numbers mean nothing. The size chart's skewed. So there's no winning with sewing patterns. I'm a size 22W for pants, but if I go to the store, I grab a 14. Okay, numbers are skewed. Numbers are just numbers. And if it's a bad day, don't put yourself in that situation, because at the end of the day, this pattern is going to be here for basically the rest of our life, probably along with all of the fabric that you're wanting to use for it. Stuff may get retired, you may have to buy it secondhand, but there's no reason to put yourself in a situation where the joy of sewing and creating is no longer there because of having to take the measurements to get started. The joy should be the biggest part, not the sadness. That is all I have to say about that. I don't want anyone to feel like they have to take their measurements at that exact time because they see the pattern is available. If it's not a good day, don't do it. Life moves on, slowly and surely, and don't put yourself in that position because we are here to sew and be happy. Happy enough. You can get a little stressed, but like, that's just part of sewing in general. But like, the thought of sewing should bring you happiness and not dread. All right. So now we're getting back to the pattern, and I think we're going to the back envelope. Yeah. Now on the back of the envelope, you will see that there are two different sides. And in this case, one side is in English and the other side is in Spanish and French. This is all the same information, it's just different languages. And I would assume that the languages and what's like most important changes based off of the country, but I could be wrong. Now after that, you will see a garment description, which elaborates on style and construction details that isn't noticeable or shown on the pieces from the pictures and diagrams on the front of the envelope. I'll be honest, I had no idea that there were even garment descriptions. Never read it. Probably will almost never read it in the future either. Anyways, you will then see the suggested fabrics, which are the fabrics that are recommended for the patterned garments. Now, technically, you can use any fabric for your projects. However, you will have to understand that changing the fabric recommendations could change how the finished piece looks. So if you're working with something that recommends a very light, soft, flowy fabric, and you choose a heavy, thick fabric, its structure is going to look completely different once finished. You will also have to understand that you will have to accommodate the different fabric. So in this case, if you have a pattern that is recommending knit fabric, but you're wanting to use a linen, you're probably going to have to make the pattern a little bit bigger because knit is meant to be stretched And linen does not have a stretch, so you would have to make the pattern more accessible with making it bigger or adding some type of closure to make it fit you in the end. Then you will see the yardage block section, which provides the yardage requirements for each style along with the fabric widths. Now you will see asterisks next to the fabric widths, which just states if the amount of fabric includes the nap or it doesn't. I had no idea what nap was, so I had to look it up. And nap just refers to the surface or texture of the fabric. Another example is you could just look at it as if you're using a pattern fabric. So it just means that you don't want to place a pattern in an opposite direction, as the fabric will look different if sitting next to that oppositely cut piece. The same is true for pattern fabric. So if you end up cutting a piece in one direction and then you flip it around, you can obviously tell when putting them together, once they're next to each other, one is going to be upside down, basically. That's basically what it means. Now, if you are wanting to mess with a pattern that will have like a perfect lineup, you don't want to be able to like see the seams, you may also have to purchase more fabric. And in other cases where you may need more fabric, would include a piece that you're working with has the sleeves cut with the body as one piece. Now, if you have fabric that doesn't match up with the suggested fabric widths, you can also look up a fabric conversion chart, which is exactly what it sounds like. You can find the width that you have and it'll give you the amount of yardage you may need instead. After that, you may also see more yardage blocks, which may be in reference to interfacings or linings that may be needed as well. Then after that, you will see notions. And notions are the other items that are needed to complete the project. In this section, you will see button sizes and amounts, zippers with their lengths and styles, as well as trims, bias tapes, elastics, and other closures or embellishments that are recommended. Then the finished garment measurements is exactly what it sounds like as well. They are just what the finished garment should measure at. This is also an area that will help you determine if adjustments need to be made prior to working with the pattern, like lengthening or shortening something, or to find out if you are wanting to use a different size for a different outcome. So if you're wanting to have a tighter look on the pattern, you may want to look at the finished garment and figure out if you're wanting to go down a size. Opposite direction, if you want a baggier look, you could check to see if you're needing to go up a size. Do note though that you do not want to go too small in sizing without making sure that the garment will fit over the largest part of your body. So don't go down in a size that fits your waist better if it will not go over your hips. Now the last thing that you will find on the back of the pattern envelope are the back views, which are the line drawings that show construction details a little more clearly than the sketches and photos do on the front of the pattern envelope. So that finishes up everything for the envelope. But I do want to say real quick, technically the digital pattern does have all of this information. It's just, you see it prior to purchasing the pattern or downloading it or whatever. It's the same thing, just not in an envelope format. So should have said that in the beginning, so my apologies. But proceeding on, we will go to the inside of the envelope, which will have the sewing instructions and the pattern pieces. And both digital and physical patterns will have this information. So the sewing instructions will include a diagram of the pattern pieces, typically along with their names. There will also be cutting layout recommendations, which is just the way that they say the pattern should be placed onto the fabric. You'll also find a reference or legend section, and that section will explain pattern markings, cutting and marking the fabrics, and how to adjust the pattern by lengthening or shortening the piece. Now, just prior to the sewing instructions, you may also find a glossary of sewing terms that you may not know, but is probably included in those instructions. And there is also a fabric key, which is just the way that they let you know which direction and which fabric they are referring to in the sewing instructions. And then you will also find different types of trimming or clipping of fabrics that may be needed during the construction process. Now, the pattern pieces are on tissue paper for physical patterns. And unfortunately, all the sizes do sit on top of each other. So your options to prep your pattern are to cut out just your size, or you could cut out the entire set of sizes and fold the pattern to the size that you need. Or lastly, you could trace the pattern with wax paper, or you could use some sort of tracing paper with a tracing wheel. Now, to cut the pattern, it really is easiest to actually iron the tissue paper. The way that you do that is you just put the paper on like an ironing board or whatever, and you would use the lowest heat setting possible for your iron, and you just iron it like you would if it was a piece of clothing. And that will get most of the creases and wrinkles out to make the cutting process a lot easier for you. And then for a digital pattern, you can either print it out and tape it all together, or if you have it, you could use a projector and set up the projector to where it will project the pattern pieces directly onto your fabric. The number one thing to check when you're working with a digital pattern, if you are planning to print it out, is to make sure that the size is correct. So most digital patterns will have some sort of square reference, typically 1 inch square or even a 5 centimeter square, in which you would print off that specific page first to make sure that you have the sizing correct before you print off the entire pattern. And some artists who create all these patterns may also have directions on how to print the pattern correctly. If they ended up noticing that there were issues during the test run, they may have specific directions on how to print that pattern as well. Finally, we are going to go over the markings that you may find on a pattern. First is the grain line, which is a straight line with arrowheads in which the pattern is to be placed on the grain of fabric, parallel to the selvage edge or the crosswise fold. Here is a diagram of the grains of fabric, and most big brand patterns for sure will have the grain line follow the straight grain, but that is just for consistency. The pattern may still be cut on the bias or even the cross grain. It is just that the grain line is set up to always follow that straight line of the grain. Now you may be wondering, is the grain line really that important? And the answer is yes. The grain is what helps figure out how much stretch your piece is going to have. So if you are putting your pattern down and everything is in line with the straight grain, that means that that specific pattern is made to have no stretch at all. Then if it's placed on the cross grain, there's meant to be a little bit of stretch, but not that much, versus the bias is where you are going to find the most stretch to any piece of fabric. Now, obviously, depending on the fabric will depend on how much stretch there is or what the stretch is like. Knits are going to have the most stretch out of anything, versus cotton is going to follow the standard practice of the stretch in the grain lines. So cotton is going to follow the straight grain having no stretch, the cross grain having a little stretch, and the bias having the most. But knit is going to still follow that, but is going to have a lot more stretch than the cotton fabric would. The fold line just means that you'll place that edge of the pattern on the fold of the fabric so you can create one complete piece once cut. Now, other symbols you may see on patterns include triangles, double triangles, diamonds, squares, small circles, and larger circles. Typically, the triangles and diamonds are known to be notches, which helps with matching seams up while you are sewing. Circles, the large and small, are normally used to designate construction details or the end of a stitching line. So if you see a circle where you would probably put a pocket, that is normally where the stitch line would end at. Now, unfortunately, patterns don't typically specify what the symbols represent on the pattern pieces. They just kind of expect you to infer what they are for based on the location and other surrounding details. But for the most part, most triangles you will see on the edge of a pattern piece, which means it's for a notch to line up seams, and circles within the pattern is typically a construction detail or end of a stitching line with another piece of a pattern. You may also have darts, which are mostly only seen on women's clothing, and that is where folds are sewn in the fabric to create shape and remove ease in garments. There may also be times where you could see pleats, and normally those are just straight lines, and you may see a dashed line in between two straight lines where they are indicating you would make a fold for a pleat. And lastly, there are lines that specify the place where the adjustment for shortening or lengthening the garment can be done. You can shorten or lengthen a garment at the bottom. However, the lengthening and shortening line is meant to keep the pattern in a smooth flow. AKA, that line is the best placement per the pattern company to lengthen or shorten it without having any drastic details being lost. Alrighty, so that is everything I have for y'all today. Hopefully I made the idea of messing with patterns a lot more tolerable, a lot easier to mess with. If y'all have any questions, please let me know down below, but I hope y'all have a great day. Goodbye.